Now the fun part, going to the paint tool, projection, and Q for the stencil. Same thing, instead of me painting and being under the problem of and dealing with the possibility that I'm not painting every piece, I'll let the software do it for me. So again, if you don't notice the attributes here, you can always go and click on the tool. So in this case it would be the projection, and now you can see the flood from camera. There you go, done. Now let's take a look at it using perspective. We've sculpted the details and we painted them, which gives you full control over how things are supposed to look like. And you can always, instead of sculpting with the high resolution, you can always lower the details down. And by the way, you will enjoy later the practice of learning the difference between those details levels, because what's going to happen is that when you export certain maps, especially like displacement, things that are really complex or rich with data, what you can do is define what is the level of details you're going to send the geometry with versus the map that you're making. I'll get to that later, but in a nutshell, you can say, I want the simplest level of subdivisions. So that's going to have even like 100 faces, ridiculously low, right? So you bake the texture to be applied to a 100 face plane. So you get to decide exactly what is that level. But for sculpting purposes here, I'm gonna go back and... Alright, so now that I've done some sculpting and painting, you can see here some organic variations to the geometry. That's great. One thing to notice is that since we have these two menus that I was talking about, the painting and sculpting, once you are on one of the sculpting tools, then it would prompt you to this menu, which is basically the sculpt menu. But if you are on one of these tools for painting, then it's going to prompt you to the painting menu. So just keep that in mind, even though you can toggle between them here. Your choice on what tool is going to affect what you see. Now the other thing to mention here is right mouse button and then create a new layer. Remember that menu that I got when I started painting the texture? Same here. So if you want, you can even specify what resolution that map is going to be. Let's say I want to create the specular. You go here and specify the specular map. You can even decide whether it's PNG, TIFF, 8 bits or 16 or 32. So that's great. That's fantastic actually. I'm gonna go with TIFF 8 bits. And I'm gonna name it specular. They didn't have roughness at the time when they created Mudbox, and it wasn't as cool and popular at the time. That's why you don't see a roughness map among the options here. The other thing I want to highlight here is that you can go to, let's say for instance, diffuse. And by the way, if you want to select on specific layer, you don't click here, you click on this area here. Okay, so here's the diffuse. You can click here right away and reduce that diffuse so you can see really what's going on. Okay, so here's my specular map. I can go into the paint and then start painting. So specular map works in grayscale. Anything that is white just like any other mask. Anything that is white, it's going to be ultimate value, and anything that is none or black, then it's going to be 0 value, meaning that anything that is white here is going to be kind of reflective. You can reduce the brush and say like, you are going to be reflective, and of course you know, you can just be as detailed as you want. And one of the tools you may be confused about, like you're painting and let's say you painted extra space and you want to erase that. How do you erase? You click and hold Control, and that is going to erase that paint. Also, similarly to sculpting, I'm going to reduce the harsh edge here, for instance. How do I do that? By holding Shift, it's going to actually soften those edges, just as in Sculpt. So now technically these areas are going to be kind of reflective. So you can create any new layer that you want among these options. In terms of the displacement, I don't create it this way. Instead, it's a different process. But yeah, you can create gloss, incandescence, or opacity if something that is kind of has certain opacity, or reflection mask. Some of these things are really old and therefore they might have a specific workflow, so just make sure you are aware what kind of maps you're creating here and how that works for your workflow. But for me, the best part about using Mudbox is that you texture what you sculpt based on what you sculpt precisely, so the details can easily be sculpted and textured right away without any issues. And of course there are multiple tools here, like for instance you have the blur or burn. So I'm gonna go with a burn, for instance, and if I go here to the diffuse, I'm going to hide the specular by clicking on here. Go to the diffuse now. Let me try the burn. Watch this. This is awesome. You can just burn certain areas. Right? Crazy. And of course you can fiddle with the amount of like strength, right? M. So it's burning a lot less now. And you can always shift and sort of modify that burn. Of course, in this case here, I'm pretty much ruining the whole map. So yeah, don't do that. So that could be a good replacement of going back to Photoshop back and forth. And of course, because you're creating this as a tileable, seamless texture, always try to avoid entirely going into the corners or the edges or the borders, because then it's gonna break the seamless feel out of it.